Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and balance coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance. Hello. We talk a lot about joyful movement on this podcast as an essential piece of both physical and mental wellness, as well as an incredibly effective way to close the stress cycle and help to prevent burnout. My guest today is a joyful movement expert, the first joyful movement expert we've had on the podcast, and she has lots of great information to share on what women need more of when it comes to exercise and how certain forms of movement and exercise can help us to support our bodies through the various stages of our lives, including childbirth, postpartum, the peri and menopause years, and beyond. Welcome, Shaina Falcone. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. It's really fun to be here.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you here. Our paths have crossed over the years many different times, but this is the first time we've actually kind of sat down and had a long conversation. So I'm really looking forward to this. So let me introduce you, Shaina, just so everybody understands who you are and the expertise that you're bringing today to the podcast. Shaina is a Canadian fitness professional and the owner of Shaina Falcone Fitness, who has worked in the fitness industry for 20 years. She's a Stott Pilates certified Pilates and bar instructor and a certified personal and group fitness coach. Shaina believes that exercise can be a joyful experience for the mind and body and has created a fusion workout program that blends Pilates, bar, strength, and cardio in order to provide a well-rounded, effective, and enjoyable exercise experience. As a mom of two busy boys who experienced difficult births herself, Shaina is also a pre- and post-natal specialist who helps moms to rebuild their strength and energy. So Shaina, let's start with you giving us your story. If you don't mind sharing, how did you become a joyful movement specialist? I think you have a little burnout story in there, so I'd love it if you would break that.
Yeah. I'll kind of get to that part in a second. I'll tell you kind of way back how I started. It was around 2001, and I was actually living in Montreal, and I had 2 university degrees that I wasn't really doing anything with, and I was actually pretty depressed, and I kind of had a moment where I sat down and said, okay, what do I love? And I loved taking fitness classes, so I went to the YMCA in Montreal, got certified. And so we don't talk about this a lot, about the piece, where fitness can really help you with depression and mental health issues. But I actually feel like it kind of saved me because it's really hard to be depressed when you're teaching a room full of very energetic, positive people who, we're feeling the music and we all want to be there. So, I got all my certifications, but it was always something I thought I had to do on the side. Like I didn't quite see it as a career. And, fast forward somewhere around 2012, I had 2 children. I had gotten a teaching degree along the way. I was teaching high school. I had no work-life balance. I would teach all day and then come home and teach classes at night. And I had nothing left for me. And I just sat down and realized this is not sustainable. I wasn't enjoying my days of sedentary teaching. And I just decided, you know what, I'm going to go back to what I actually love doing, which is, teaching movement, helping women. And I said, I'm going to let the teaching go. It was a big discussion between my family and I, because it was going to mean a huge drop in income and going out on my own, which, as any entrepreneur will tell you, is, risky and scary. But so that was kind of back in 2012 where I became Shaina Falcone Fitness kind of full time, and I am much happier.
So let me ask you this is kind of a side note, but as you were talking, I was just thinking about my own experience leaving law and kind of angsting about a lot of the same things, angsting about the financial consequences for my family and, what that was going to look like going forward for us. But I personally have never once thought to myself, I should have done something different. I've never once regretted that decision, which I always say is like the mark of like a well-made decision is when you're not revisiting it all the time. How do you feel about that decision now? Like what is it, eight years later?
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't regret it. There are, times where, sure it would be nice to have that second steady income, because fitness is a little bit of a fickle field. People come in and out. But overall, no, there's not a day where I've ever thought, gosh, I wish I were a teacher again. I have the utmost respect for teachers because I know their job is really hard, but I think I'm doing what is best for me and my family.
Yeah. And how do you think that plays into, like, how do you think personally, what's your personal experience been with like doing the thing that you really love and how that plays into your overall balance and wellness?
I don't have a lot of times where I think I have to go to work. It's more of this, oh, I get to do this and I'm really excited to do this. And I get excited to plan the fitness program. So it's, a quality of life that, it's not really a monetary value, but I think what's more important is that I'm feeling excited and joyful about going to work and the work that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's so great. There's such a big difference between framing things from the perspective of I have to do this versus I get to do this. And that's something I use in coaching all
Yeah.
the time as an easy way to shift your perspective. So I love that. Thanks for sharing your story. So I introduced this podcast today and I talked about joyful movement, which is something that I talk about a lot in the context of balance and finding balance. And one of my regular guests, Dr. Sarah Bailey, and I have talked about joyful movement as an important part of recovering from burnout and just in generally maintaining your overall health and wellness. But when you're talking about joyful movement and this idea of advocating joyful movement for women, what does that look like? What does a joyful movement practice typically look like?
Well, I mean, it's very individual for everybody. I mean, if you don't enjoy whatever exercise or workout you're going to do, you won't do it. And I've learned that over the years. You have to find something that you want to do and that you look forward to doing, or you won't. It'll become a chore. So, I really like this idea of we've come so far away from exercise as punishment for the body. Like, I've eaten this, now I have to do this. So I like to think of exercise more as, like we said earlier, something you get to do and something that it's kind of like a gift you're giving your body, but it might look different for everybody. So for me, the blend that works for my body is cardio. And I can go, if you want me to, I can go into the reasons why I feel cardio is important. And then strength training, which for women is really, really important. And then a mind-body practice, for me, it's Pilates, to increase flexibility and just sort of have a quieter time to connect in a very loving and gentle way with my body.
Yeah, I think and that's really what that's what I was hoping you'd say, because I have always, I don't have any training in fitness. Obviously, that's not within my scope. But at the same time, as somebody who helps women recover from burnout and find a better balance, physical exercise and movement is a part of that for all of us. And I am always recommending that people find something that they love, like you just said, something that feels good, something that feels like a treat or a real gift to be able to do, but also that they make sure that they maintain balance in there. And Sarah Bailey, I know you've listened to some of those podcasts, she's on here all the time, and she's a big fan of that too, that idea of balance, because she says, particularly in our peri and menopausal years, exercise can become another form of stress for us. So if we're exercising in an extreme way all the time, that can in itself create more stress on our bodies and kind of work against that idea of creating balance. It can actually be kind of counterproductive. So she talks about this idea of balancing your exercise as well and making sure that you are incorporating some forms of exercise that are gentler and that are kind of maybe a little bit slower. And, in the words of, somebody who's a recovered extreme, not athlete, but an extreme exerciser, maybe like a little easier. I'm putting that in air quotes, right? But she talks about the importance of incorporating those. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today, is because you do have such a great blend of these different modalities in terms of your personal exercise routine, but also I think what you teach women. And so we're going to talk specifically about Pilates a lot today, because that's one form of exercise that I think a lot of women don't know very much about. So I wanted to explore that with you because you're an expert in that area. But I also want to just generally talk about the importance of incorporating a balance of cardio, strength training, and, as you call it, kind of this mind-body practice. So why don't you talk about cardio? Just take me through some of the reasons why incorporating cardio in your routine is important.
Yeah. And cardio can have so many forms. So, we can have the traditional, a lot of people like to run, and that's great. There's the high-low aerobics, which a lot of us used to do, which I actually still love, like kickboxing, even using weights can be cardio. But I do want to touch on something that Sarah Bailey does talk about, because it's very easy to overdo the cardio. So a good benchmark is if you, and I don't know who has time for this, but some people do. If you're training like 60 minutes, 90 minutes of cardio, that's referred to as overtraining. And that's when we do start to see an increase of cortisol and the benefits are lost. So assuming you're doing, like I like a nice 30 minutes more intense, maybe 45 of cardio. So the benefits of that, there are a lot of actually mental benefits. So it's that feeling of getting that heart rate up, your endorphins are jacked. It's this feeling of overcoming something. Like, it's hard. Cardio can be really hard. And mentally, I think that's really great for us to have this feeling of, I can do this. Like I'm breathing in air deeply. My heart rate is raised, but I can do this. So it's a nice feeling of accomplishment, I think, for a lot of us. And then, our heart is a muscle. So we need to work it. And we work that through cardiovascular. Sweating can get rid of toxins. So I just think it's a really important way to detox mind and body. And, we have to work our heart. So it's a great way to do that.
Yeah, it's my rage exercise too. Like, I honestly, I can use like yoga, something like Pilates. I can use those things for other emotions, but I don't find they do much for me when I'm really angry with something. So cardio, I've always found, has been kind of like my rage exercise. What about strength training? And that's something that has come back into my life in the last few years. I resisted it for years. I thought I didn't enjoy it. But the truth is I just hadn't found the right version of that for me. I tried different things over the years, but I haven't, in the last couple of years found something that I love that involves a piece of it is always strength training. So, but the reason why I've really been focusing on it in the last couple of years is because, as everybody who listens to this podcast knows, I'm now officially in menopause. And so I am concerned with making sure that I maintain bone density and strength. And I know that strength training for women is really, really important as we age. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of focused and committed to incorporating that in my weekly routine. Can you have anything to add on that in terms of the benefits of the strength training?
Yeah. So for women, strength training is really, really important, especially as we start to go into perimenopause and menopause, both because of the bone density. I see a lot of clients who come to me and say, okay, my doctor says I've got to do some form of strength training because, I'm at risk of breaking my bones. But also women in particular, our metabolism slows down as we age. And this really starts to happen as we start to go into perimenopause, because our progesterone levels are dropping. So before that time in our lives, we're getting an extra calorie burn post-ovulation just because we had a period. And so as we start to go into these, perimenopause and menopause years, that starts to drop off. And women after the age of 40 start to gain a certain amount of fat per decade without gaining the muscle to balance it out. So one really important benefit of strength training, which is awesome, is it's a way to build lean muscle tissue. And there's not another way to do that. That's the only way you can do it, is through strength training. So we're building lean muscle tissue. Lean muscle tissue burns calories at rest way more than fat. So for a health perspective, a lot of women as we age start to gain weight, and for a lot of women, it's around the midsection, which, vanity aside, is dangerous for our organs. That's where our internal organs are. So suffocating the heart and the stomach. So we want to be able to have a way to combat that. And strength training is a great way, because we're building lean muscle tissue. We're able to burn more calories at rest, and we're actually able to change the shape of our body. So right. I think that's pretty important.
Yeah. And also, as you're talking, I'm thinking about just generally about injury prevention as we age. I mean, that's certainly something like for me personally, I've struggled with some chronic back and neck issues as a result of arthritis, and strength training for me has been a big piece of me not injuring myself, of basically, preventing some of the, I've prevented a lot of the kind of downtime from exercise that was part of my life. It's historically been part of my life. I just injure myself. My back would get sore and my neck would get sore when I was just doing cardio. So when I was just running, for example, that would happen regularly. But with the incorporation of strength training, I find that has decreased. And also just generally, like all of those basic, I think they call them the prime movements in fitness, like the push, the pull, the squat, whatever they are. If you're doing strength training, it makes all of those daily prime movements, the things that we have to do just to be human, it makes all of those easier and safer, presumably, for us as well.
Yeah, and I think for women too, especially, it's really nice to feel strong. And strength training will do that for you. You're building muscle tissue. And I think that's a really powerful feeling. And
I agree.
I didn't use to strength train the way I do now. And especially being a mom, that's, it's nice to say, yeah, I'll pick that up for you, or I'll open that for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I feel much more empowered when strength training is a piece of my exercise program, and I just generally feel stronger. So for all of those reasons, I think we've covered like why regular exercise or movement is important for women. And we've also talked about why it needs to be joyful. I think you mentioned it, and I've mentioned it before on this podcast. If you don't love it, you will not do it. And not only will you not do it, but that will lead to you feeling crappy about the fact that you didn't do it. And when you feel crappy about not doing something, that usually leads to you engaging in some other form of self-destructive behavior in order to soothe yourself and feel better. So it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle. So there is really no point in starting an exercise regime that is not something that you enjoy at all, because it is going to, first of all, it's not going to last. And second of all, it's probably going to cost you more than it's going to give you. So I really encourage women all the time to go out and try different things, like try all the different things until you find something that feels great, that you really enjoy and that you look forward to doing. You should look forward to your exercise instead of having that like feeling of dread and, the pit in your stomach that you actually don't want to go to the gym because you don't enjoy it. So what I want to talk about today, though, specifically, and kind of introduce as a form of joyful movement that's open and that's open and available for women, is Pilates, because you're an expert in Pilates, and it's something that I used to do when I lived in Calgary many, many years ago. I used to do Pilates. I had a good friend who was a Pilates instructor, and I loved it. And then I also did some Pilates as physiotherapy for a couple of years in relation to my back and neck issues. So I was doing a lot of work every week in using Pilates. So I wanted to have you on today because I wanted you to explain to everybody what Pilates is all about and what makes it so unique and amazing as a form of joyful movement for women.
Yeah. Okay. And I do find a lot of women and people in general don't really understand or know what Pilates is or have been introduced to it. So, in general terms, Pilates is a mind-body exercise system. It was developed by Joseph Pilates after World War I, and the goal was kind of to get a balanced body. So correcting postural imbalances. For instance, I have scoliosis, which is a curved spine. So Pilates is really good for me because people with scoliosis tend to have a lot of back pain. One shoulder might be higher than the other. Your tailbone might be out. One hip might be higher than the other. So it's all about working in different planes of motion. So not just forward and back, not just side to side, working through all the planes, getting mobile through your spine, and then using your breath to connect to the different muscles of your body. So it's mind body in that you are focusing your mental energy on the area where you want to work. So it's very different from a gym workout because it's quality over quantity. So rather than doing, say, 20 reps of an exercise, we might do 5 to 10 high quality reps and move on to the next. So it's kind of a flow like that.
Right. And it sounds a lot like yoga when you describe it, but it's not like yoga in many ways. Can you explain how those two practices are different?
Yeah. I'll preface this by saying I'm not a yoga instructor. So yogis, please feel free to correct me if I misstep here. But yoga to me is a little bit more of a spiritual and emotional practice in terms of the mind body. It has a very clear history, and the movements have a spiritual meaning. In terms of physiologically, yoga is moving a lot of times from static pose to static pose, whereas Pilates is a little bit more dynamic in terms of you just flow from one move to the other. It's a little more focused on just anatomically having your body in a certain position, aligning yourself, aligning your posture, and a little bit more focus on strength. And there's actually a resistance component of Pilates as well. So it sometimes does fit into that strength training component.
Right. And there's a big, like my recollection from when I did Pilates, like I always remember that it's called the 100, where you breathe like really fast 100 times in a row while you're doing some kind of abdominal exercise. And so my recollection of Pilates when I did it is that there's a lot of breath work that happens in Pilates. Am I right on that?
No, you're right. Yeah, we have the stop Pilates, which is the type of Pilates that I am trained in. We have 5 principles. So breathing is the first one. It differs from yoga because in yoga, and these are the classes that I've gone to, it focuses on the belly breath. So expanding your stomach on the inhale and then letting it pull in on the exhale. Whereas in Pilates, we focus on trying to keep the abdominals engaged the whole time. So rather than letting your stomach lift on the inhale, we do what's called 3D breathing into the ribs. So you're trying to breathe into the, front, backs, and sides of the ribs. So your stomach will stay engaged on the inhale. And then on the exhale, you want to connect really deeply to your lower abdominals and kind of pull up and in. So the breathing in Pilates, it is there to connect to our support muscles and our deep abdominals, but it's also there just to kind of get some mental focus, release tension in your head and neck. Again, as with any exercise, bring oxygen to your muscles, but it's really there to kind of tailor that mind-body connection.
Yeah. And we talk a lot about breath on this podcast. It comes up almost every episode. Someone's talking about breathing as a technique. And it's something that I use all the time in relation to stress management and anxiety management with my clients. And so I've already talked about the connection between the breath and breathing and the power that we have to manage stress and anxiety better using our breath in a proactive way. How can we use the breath to improve mindfulness and manage stress in your experience?
As I mentioned, like it does help relieve the tension in your neck and shoulders that you might not even realize that you are holding. I know I hold a lot of tension in that area, but it's also takes you into your body. And so in Pilates, we use a lot of visualization. So you can just sit, you don't even have to be doing Pilates. You can just sit down and on the inhale, visualize your rib cage expanding like a balloon or like an accordion, and just, take time to see that and feel that and really get the air into the lower lobes of your lungs. And then on the exhale, feel your ribs kind of knit together, or, the balloon kind of tightens up, the accordion pulls together. And just doing that, just sitting and doing that and allowing yourself to visualize that is just going to calm your body, calm your mind, and take you out of whatever external stresses you had. And even if you can just take 5 minutes to just do some breathing like that, pulling up, from your low belly as you exhale, you'll connect to your core. Maybe you'll stand a little taller afterwards. It's just a nice way to just kind of disconnect from the rest of the world and connect to yourself.
Yeah. And as I've said many times before, when you do that kind of an exercise, what you end up doing is pulling your body back into the parasympathetic response. So you pull yourself out of fight or flight and back into that relaxation mode, which is great because you physically feel relaxed and you feel better, but also really important because that's what helps to bring your cortisol back down, that stress hormone that we want to try to manage better. So thanks. That's really helpful. Now, what I wanted to talk to you about today is the pelvic floor. And I said to you when we did our pre-interview, I was like, I know nothing about this. I really don't. But I do know that many, many of the women that I work with and many of the women who'll be listening to this podcast have had some issues, for lack of a better word, with their pelvic floor function. And you are kind of a pelvic floor person. So I wanted to talk to maybe
Yeah.
start by explaining like what is the pelvic floor and what are some of the, what are some of the common issues that women experience around in relation to their pelvic floor, and when and why do those tend to present?
Yeah. So, I mean, in Pilates, we always sort of talk about the pelvic floor because it's connected to our deep abdominals, but I didn't really start to dive in until I actually had pelvic floor issues after my second son. So, what the pelvic floor is, if you can picture your pelvic area, you've got your hip bones in the front and your pubic bone on the bottom and your tailbone in the back. Those are all connected by the pelvic floor. So, it's kind of like a little hammock that sits on the floor or the base of your pelvis. And what we want for that hammock, or it's also been described kind of as a bowl or a trampoline, we want it to be smooth and flat. We don't want a saggy hammock. But sometimes
Nobody wants a saggy hammock, Shaina.
no, nobody wants a saggy hammock. But sometimes, certain issues occur, most often through childbirth, that the hammock becomes saggy because the pelvic floor, it's not just muscles, it's muscles and connective tissue and fascia, little spider web-like fibers that sort of run across the hammock. And it supports our bladder. And it also does connect to our deep abdominals. It does support our lower back a little bit. So, when it starts to dysfunction, you might notice some leakage. So a weak pelvic floor, the saggy hammock, coughing, sneezing, lifting heavy weights, jumping, you might notice that you start to leak a little bit through your bladder because it's not supporting your bladder the way it should. But we can also, so that would be a weak pelvic floor. You might also have a situation where you get a really tight pelvic floor, and that could be a stress response. And the hammock's like scrunched up, and that would be the opposite. You're not leaking. You actually might not, you might feel like you have to go to the bathroom all the time, urinate, but you can't.
Right.
And then we have prolapse, which is, like things are actually falling out. And when that happens, I would certainly counsel everyone to go to a pelvic floor specialist. And there are a lot around, and they're very helpful.
Yeah.
But just generally, if you're having leaking here and there, I would still recommend to go to a pelvic floor specialist. But there are ways to strengthen a weak pelvic floor. And it's not just women who, if you've had childbirth, you probably may have had some pelvic floor issues, but also menopause, because as the rest of our muscles weaken, those muscles weaken as well.
Right.
So, that's why the Depends product is out there. It
right.
It happens to a lot of people.
Yeah. I remember when I used to go to CrossFit, I don't know if any of the CrossFit ladies are listening to this, but we always, we used to have a laugh every time we had to do double unders, which are when you had to skip, because there would always be someone having a little teeny tiny pee during the double unders. And that was a result, I guess, of a saggy hammock.
Saggy hammock, yeah.
So does Pilates, how does Pilates like play into that? So, is Pilates a form of exercise that helps to strengthen the pelvic floor, or are there other exercises that you teach women?
Yeah, it's sort of a part of Pilates. So not everybody goes into it, but because I had a very difficult birth with my second child, and I developed quite a lot of pelvic floor issues, it became a mission of mine to integrate this into my practice. So the idea with Pilates is we can't see when you're working your pelvic floor. It's not something I can see as an instructor. It's something you have to feel. Right. So with a lot of clients, I'll get them to do a little test just to connect to their deep abdominals. So just laying on their back, I have them put their hands below their hip bones, and I get them to do kind of like a ha breath to see if they can, that's just connecting to your deep abdominals. And if they can do that, then we try to work on getting them to do that without doing the ha breath. We used to do it as a cough, but we don't do that anymore. That's not sanitary. But for specifically the pelvic floor, there are some just simple cues you can use to try to pull it up, because if we have that saggy hammock, we want to try to pull it up. So just even sitting, if you have like a yoga block or a squishy ball, sitting really tall and just visualizing your pelvis as the base of a building. and thinking about that building having an elevator and using the pelvic floor to pull up the elevator, or thinking of pulling a Kleenex out of a box. It's very, very subtle. So you would inhale, and then on the exhale, think of sort of pulling that Kleenex out of the box. We have other images that are a little, they're a little more anatomical, like, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it on here.
You can say what you want, I think.
So think about, lifting a blueberry up into the vagina, or because the pelvic floor also connects to the tailbone, think of lifting a marble up through your rectum. Right. And just kind of getting that idea of opening. So if our pelvis was a clock, so the clock would be the hip bones and the pubic bone on the bottom and the tailbone on the back, inhaling and feeling the clock expand, and then exhaling and feel the clock kind of pulling up and in. So those are exercises you can do for the saggy hammock. If your pelvic floor is too stiff, then you need to focus on that elevator kind of dropping down and relaxing, because we do need to be able to relax the muscles as well.
Right. Can I ask you a question about, are Kegels part of this pelvic floor business, or is that separate?
They are, yeah. So Kegels are sort of the basic level of, you go to see a pelvic floor physiotherapist, will probably start with Kegels.
Right.
And what we try to do in Pilates is sort of integrate it into the movement. So my favorite tool to use is the squishy mini stability ball. I use the 7-inch Pilates ball, and having that between the knees in various exercises kind of helps you squeeze the ball and pull up and in. So the Kegels would be like just focusing on the pelvic floor. And then in Pilates, we try to focus on it while also working the rest of the abdominal wall.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks. If there's someone listening to this and they're thinking to themselves, oh, I've had this forever, like this has been my issue for forever, and they haven't been to see a pelvic floor therapist yet, or they haven't done any kind of proactive work to try to manage it through exercise, is it ever too late?
No, I mean, it will be a little bit more work, but it's not too late. This is what pelvic floor specialists are for. There are physiotherapists who have been trained in this, and this is their specialty. So they absolutely can help you if you've been having this issue for years.
Okay, that's good to know. We always try to lead with hope on this podcast. So
there is absolutely hope. Okay. Yeah. So
great.
Yeah, if you've been dealing with leakage and whatever for years, you can get help. You don't have to just deal with it.
Okay, that's great. Now you raised this with me, and I'm probably not even going to pronounce it right, but you said you thought people might be interested in talking about diastasis recti. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can pronounce it I say it diastasis, but I'm sure that either is correct.
Diastasis recti. Okay. So I don't know anything about diastasis recti. It's different from the saggy hammock. Am I right?
It's different from the saggy hammock.
Is it, I'm guessing now, because I've had some friends for whom this has happened, does it have to do with when the abdominal wall kind of separates? Is it that issue that happens post-childbirth for a lot of women?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't you explain what it is and how you'd know if you had it?
Right. Well, I'll say, I mean, I had it happen to me, which, I was devastated about, because as a Pilates instructor, you don't want to have it. It's like it's not the saggy hammock, but it's the stomach bulge. And so I'll kind of just explain what it is. And it can actually happen to men as well. It's not just women. It most often occurs in postnatal women, but it can happen to men as well. And I'll explain why. So I'll just kind of start with our abdominal area, just to give you a sense of how it functions. So the outer layer of muscles is called our rectus abdominis. And below that, we have our internal and external obliques. Those kind of run on diagonals. And then our deepest layer, the layer closest to our back, these muscles run horizontal, are called the transverse abdominis. And that's our corset muscle. It kind of pulls everything together. So what happens in diastasis recti is those outer layer of muscles, it's basically two bigger belly of muscles that run up and down, and they're connected in between each other by a layer of connective tissue. And this is kind of like our cosmetic abs, our six-pack muscles, what people think of when you think of the abdominal area. So what happens is, most often it occurs during childbirth. There's an outward pressure on that layer of muscles. And remember, they're only connected by a layer of connective tissue, so they're not connected by muscles. So if there's any type of stress or outward pressure or stretching, they can snap and become separated from each other. And when that happens, the two vertical bellies of muscles kind of sag, and you get that telltale kind of bulge in the stomach, and you can kind of see it right above your belly button. And if you have it and you're wearing a tight shirt, you can see there's an actual separation between the two lines of muscles. There's a gap. You can diagnose it yourself. I would recommend getting it diagnosed by somebody if you think that you have it. But if you have that bulge, if you have a lot of back pain and bloating and constipation, these are all indicators that perhaps your rectus layer of your abdominals have separated. So it happened to me because I had a very, very large second baby. People would stop me on the street and ask me if I was having twins. I didn't. He was just an almost 10-pound boy. And so mine, I actually had a really, really large, what they call a 7-finger separation. So my two bellies of the muscles were separated by the length of 7 fingers. So that was a harder one to fix, but it can be done. So I see a lot of women who, this has maybe happened. They maybe had their children years ago and didn't realize, and saw the belly bulge and thought, I got to do more crunches.
Right. Yeah.
Which is actually the very worst thing that you can do.
Okay. So what can you do for it, Shaina? Are there like specific exercises targeted at this?
Yeah. So I'll start off with what you should not do. So if you suspect that you have this, or if you've been diagnosed with it, you don't want to at all engage that outer layer of muscles. So the traditional abdominal exercises, the curls, the crunches, any type of rolling up, you don't want to put any pressure on that because it's already separated, and any pressure will further separate it. You don't want to do a plank because that's downward pressure on that area. You don't want to do any twisting. So what you do want to do is kind of focus on working that deepest layer of muscle I talked about, the transverse, and sort of corseting everything back together. So some really easy exercises you can do. You want to try to keep your spine just sort of in the same neutral position. You don't want to be curling your spine. So laying on your back, and I don't know if you've heard of the dead bug exercise.
Oh, I remember this I remember that from when I did Pilates. Yes. Can you remind me of this?
Yeah, you're laying on your back, you have your knees bent at 90 degrees, and it's actually just a really, really small movement. You're just trying to sort of keep your rib cage pulled in, keep your abdominals pulled in, and you're just lowering one leg slowly and lifting it, lowering the other leg slowly and lifting it, and just trying to maintain that sort of corset feeling with your abdominals, not letting them pop up while against the movement of your legs. Another good exercise would be a side plank, so just a static hold of the side plank, and then a bridge, which I believe is a yoga move as well. You're laying on your back with your hips up and your feet down. Mm-hmm. So very simple movements that don't move the spine a lot.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good. So there's hope for that too.
There's absolutely hope for that. Yes.
Yeah. In fact, you're a comeback story. So does that muscle, do those muscles actually like reconnect and repair? Like the connective tissue you said that snaps, or the muscle?
Yeah. So eventually it will grow back together, but you can sort of help heal it by strengthening your deep abdominals. And it's actually kind of cool because I find I'm actually stronger now because I spent so many years not working those, 6-pack muscles, but actually working the deeper abdominals. So I feel stronger than I did before I even had my kids.
Right. Okay. Well, that's hopeful. I'm sure there are lots of people listening to this who are struggling with that. I know I've had many friends over the years that have struggled with that and have gone to see therapists and, had to pick up a different exercise regime in order to try to heal that.
Yeah. And I ask women when they come to my classes, even if they've had their children years ago, let's look and see. There's a way to test. You lay on your back and you place your fingers sort of just right below or above your belly button. And if you curl up and your fingers go in, a considerable amount, there's a space there.
Okay. So this is something that you can, at least you can probably get a sense as to whether you might have it, and then we're recommending that
Yeah,
you go and get that confirmed by somebody before you enter into
exactly.
a program around it. Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to Pilates for a bit and talk a little bit more about that, because I remember when I did Pilates, as I said, in two different ways. So I did Pilates in a group class where it was just floor work. So it was mat work. I think we may have used some balls and some
Hmm.
other like props. But then I also did Pilates in a more of a private setting as part of a physiotherapy kind of regime, where I was using what's called the reformer, which
Hmm.
is like a contraption that like kind of looks like a medieval torture machine, but it's actually not. So why don't you talk a little bit about the different types of, it's not different type of Pilates, but just those two kind of formats for doing Pilates.
Yeah. So the reformer, which is a wonderful machine, was actually developed by Joseph Pilates. He was in an internment camp after World War I, and he was there with others. And he actually used the beds and the springs of the beds to come up with this exercise system, which later translated.
So cool! I did not.
It's really
so
cool.
Neat. Okay, that
Yeah,
makes so
and
much more sense, because it really does feel like you're on a bed and you're kind of hooked up to. So I can see how that. Oh, that's so interesting. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. And so it's spring based. It works with springs, and then there are straps for your hands and your feet. It's very hard to describe.
It is.
It sounds a little crazy, but it's a very gentle way to actually do resistance training, because you are moving against the resistance of the springs. So that's sort of, we divide Pilates into sort of equipment based, so which that would be, and then mat based. So in my studio, I teach the mat based, and we use a lot of props, a lot of times to try to mimic the reformer moves.
Right.
But if you don't have a reformer, there are still a lot of ways that you can use the mat and the props. So the ball, resistance bands. There's something, it's called the Pilates circle. It's a ring, but a lot of my clients call it the ring of fire.
You're not selling this, Shaina.
I know. They say it in a really happy way.
Okay. Yeah. So, and that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, if someone's listening to this and they maybe tried a Pilates class years ago, or, they even maybe more recently, they did something online and they didn't really feel like they got it. Is that a common thing? I remember that when I started Pilates, I remember the first time I went to the class, I was kind of like, how is this going to work? It didn't feel like I figured it out. It didn't feel like I was getting the benefit from it. But then, of course, the more classes I went to, the more, just the better I got. I think it was probably the mind-body connection that changed for me. I started to realize that it was all about focusing on really specific parts of my body in conjunction with the movement that I was doing. And then, I was sold on it. I absolutely loved it when I did it. So is that a common experience with Pilates?
Absolutely. I find, and I like to tell people, give it 5 classes, because you might have an aha moment. You might have it sooner, but I find it's after 5 classes where it all starts to click. You start to integrate the breath with the movement. You're understanding when to inhale and exhale. And I also like to tell people, don't get hung up on, oh, I didn't inhale when she said, or I didn't exhale. It will come. So just breathe. Like, just don't hold your breath. We really just want you to breathe. But it does take a while. If it's something you're not used to think, oh, now I feel where my rib cage should be, or, oh, I do feel my tailbone. And sometimes it takes like just one cue that's different. So I could give you the same cue like 20 times and it's doing nothing for you. And then maybe one day I come up with a different cue, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I feel it now. So it does take a little while, and just be patient with it, because once you get that aha moment, it's a beautiful thing. You're like, whoa, I'm so connected to my body.
Yeah, it is. And I'll tell you, like, I mean, I don't know if this is just my friend, but I see you as well. And like, the Pilates body is a pretty strong looking body. Like she just had this tone to her muscles that, it's not the same as what I see with women who only strength train. So I don't know if you can comment on that. Maybe that's just that's just a one-off thing that I saw with her, but there was like a length and tone to her
Mhm.
muscles that I always really appreciated, and of course like wanted for myself, which is probably why I was doing so much Pilates. Is that actually a thing, or is that just
Um, it is a thing. It sounds funny though to talk about it, but I
yeah,
mean, you hear, the studio where I took my training was called the Pilates Body.
yeah.
So it definitely is a thing. Joseph Pilates originally worked with dancers.
Mhm.
So there is this idea of length, and that it's a type of movement that not just strengthens your muscles, but actively lengthens them. So we're working on improving posture, and we're trying to work on a feeling like if you're, lifting your leg, let's not think about lifting up. Let's think about reaching long and reaching out. So sometimes I'll say it's like someone's taking your leg from the top of your hip and pulling it away from your body. So we try to integrate that. And there's a huge flexibility component. So while we're strengthening, we're also stretching, and stretched muscles do tend to look sort of that longer look that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think the posture is a big piece of it too. Those of you listening to this
Yeah.
podcast, you can't see this, but I've been like sitting up every few minutes because I'm watching Shaina, and she's got such a nice straight back, and I'm feeling like a slouch. But I do remember that it helped with posture for sure, which of course makes you look kind of taller and longer and
Exactly.
stuff.
Posture is a great cosmetic tool.
Yeah, it sure is. I'm feeling better already just sitting up here. Um, okay, so we're recording this right in the middle of COVID. And so this is kind of a natural question, I think. But is Pilates something that you can do from home? Because so many of us right now are stuck. Our gyms have been shut down, and we're just trying to improvise with exercise that's home based.
Yeah. So you want to make sure that you find Pilates where the instructor is actually trained, so that you're going to get the best, or the most useful, I should say, cues for your body. There's a lot of home equipment you can get. My favorite is a little mini Pilates ball. You can get that on Amazon for less than $15. So you don't need the expensive equipment or anything like that, for sure.
Yeah, so you probably just
You need
need
a mat.
a mat, hey?
Yeah, you,
Yeah.
you need a mat.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean this, and which leads to the next thing. This is how I know Shaina, because I follow Shaina on Instagram, and she has a really just a really active Instagram page where she posts. I think, do you do it daily, Shaina?
I do it 5 days a week.
Yeah, that's a
I take
lot.
weekends off. It's a
That's a
lot.
lot. You're way better at Instagram content than me. That's a lot to be posting videos every day, but it's great. Every day there's something on there that gives you kind of a little mini workout or exercise that you can try, that she films from her studio. And you do online classes as well, like full classes, right, Shaina?
Yeah. So I've sort of right now during COVID moved my studio online. So I have a website, and I'm keeping with my fusion fitness theme. There are cardio classes on there. There are strength training, and there are Pilates and bar classes as well.
Yeah, I actually did one of the free classes that you have on your website the other day, just to remind myself of what Pilates feels like. I think it was a bit of a fusion, the one that I did. It was kind of a combination.
Yes.
Some of the things were definitely felt like Pilates based movements to me. So where can people find you, Shaina, if they want to explore some of these Pilates, or also some of these other fusion workouts that you provide?
So my website is shainafalconefitness.com, or they can find me on Instagram for my little mini workouts. It's just at Shaina Falcone Fitness on Instagram.
And that's ShainaFalcone for anyone who's listening. Shaina.
Yeah, it's not easy to spell.
Shaina Falcone Fitness. I will put the link in the show notes, with this podcast for anybody who's interested in checking it out. It's just been fascinating, actually, to talk to somebody about some of these issues, especially the pelvic floor and I'm not going to pronounce it right. No, I'm not going to pronounce it right. You say it. What's the other one?
Diastasis.
Diastasis
recti.
Yeah. Diastasis recti. It's been really interesting to talk to you about that. Thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise around that, and your own personal story. And I just want to say to everybody who's listening, I mean, the reason I wanted to do this again is that this is just one option for you that might be your joyful movement thing. So if you've been searching for that, or, especially during COVID, a lot of us have been punted out of our regular routines in terms of exercise. If you're looking for something that actually feels good and that is enjoyable, this might be it. So I wanted to introduce that today, and I'm hoping to have other people come on this podcast and talk about other forms of joyful, what might be joyful movement for you. I think it's all about exploring these different things. And as with everything in life, variety is pretty key to keeping us from getting, bored and in a rut around it. So one of the things I love about Shaina's approach is that it really does incorporate, really is this fusion, this blend of different things. And of course, your Instagram page provides you with, it looks like it's something completely different every day when I watch it, which is great. So there's lots of variety in there. So thank you so much, Shaina, for joining me today on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. To be sure you don't miss any upcoming Bite Size conversations, subscribe now to this podcast. For more balance and wellness tips or to connect with me, visit my website at wendymccallum.com. That's WENDYMCCALLUM.com.